I believe we might have a stream. Uh-oh. Harold is here. Oh my goodness, Harold is here. And Pat is here. Howdy, Pat. Pat's a regular in our forums. Got to say hi to Pat. Pat's around all the time. So, Karsten, it looks like you've got enough of a web connection going that you're at least able to watch this. So I'm glad that we're able to get something out of all this for you. So that's very cool. Glad you're able to jump in there. And Emery is registered to play in a couple of different things we've got going this weekend. So that's very awesome. So very glad to see all kinds of gamers showing up here with us. So the stream appears to be live. I am double checking us right now to make sure that I'm not just hallucinating. I mean, I'm only one drink in, but I am a bit of a lightweight, so I could, in fact. Yeah, well, I wouldn't count on it, but it's not beyond the pale. All right, the stream is a stream in, so I think we're good, Mr. Matthew, sir. The floor was always yours, but it's back to just you. As you're pulling those up, just real quick for everybody, throw your questions into the chat in the Zoom conference. We are prioritizing the folks in the Zoom who are going to be asking questions. If we've got time to get to folks that are on YouTube that aren't necessarily a part of the convention, we will. But if you guys throw the questions into the chat, that's where we'll peel off the questions for Matt when we get to the end. I was on mute. I was talking to a mute button. I do that at work all the time. I don't think I can because you are officially the host now in order to present.
I mean, lots of things that you would expect, and it's always fun to see. You get a sense of the history here too. You can see these came off of a dot matrix printer. You can see the dot matrix fonts, but you really do get a sense that you're kind of looking over somebody's shoulder. In this case, Larry Bond, as he's drafting Harpoon, as he's refining the system. You get to see it's like he's thinking out loud, and as he's changes thoughts or revises or updates. This is an image I love. He's sort of, and this actually, something very much like this appears in the Harpoon rule books. He's illustrating the different, different levels at which a ship or an aircraft might be. Everything from, he's got the Starship Enterprise up there to a strategic bomber, tactical aircraft, surface vessels, and then subs above and below the layer, and that's a less fortunate sub. Anyway, again, if you know Harpoon, you'll have seen this in its published form. There's the original. You get a sense, too, of just how heavily he worked and reworked this data. Whatever else you want to say about Larry and Harpoon, he takes this real seriously, and anytime there's new information or he has cause to update his thinking, things change. These are the index cards I mentioned. Again, this was sort of the what he started with in the earliest stages of the game. Nowadays, everything is kept on a database that he still retains authority over. Again, you can this was interesting because you can see him updating the listing for one of the Harpoon missiles. Moving through, among other things, there are scenarios, campaigns, AARs for game sessions that he had run, including the ones that found their way into Red Storm Rising. So the original Vampire scenarios where he games out the attack on the aircraft carriers with Tom Clancy. There it is, Vampire 2 After Action Report, 1 July 1985. Now, I believe these have actually subsequently been re-released and published, and so you can actually, you can buy these in a kind of polished up format. But there's, what you see publicly available is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more that, unsurprisingly, that Larry has and has not published. Things of a somewhat personal nature too, just inscriptions, correspondence, notes, things that really I think serve to, we've talked a lot about data, but this is also kind of it's a very human process. There are relationships here, anything as complex as the Harpoon franchise. There are numerous people involved. There are relationships that unfold over years. Those relationships sometimes turn sour. And a lot of that, again, is captured in letters and documentation. Apple II backup disks and documentation. What we have here, this is source code, and this is some sort of flowchart. This is related to some sort of computer program that was written to assist with the playing of Harpoon. So kind of a fascinating way in which something that has a digital life begins life nonetheless on paper, still written in longhand, sketched, flowcharted on paper. There are things that come not just on paper, but in different formats. So 5 1/4 inch discs, which archivists are actually not afraid of encountering 5 1/4 inch or 3 1/2 inch floppy disks. There are pretty good tools available for reading data off of those. And in my experience too, the data doesn't obsolesce as quickly as you might think. Just from my own experience, I had an Apple II as a kid growing up. I still have the computer and all of the diskettes that I used with it. And they're just about all still legible. I mean, here we are in 2020. I can still plug in the Apple II I had around 1982 or 3, plug in a diskette just like this, and 9 times out of 10 or 49 times out of 50, the diskette will load just fine. We were able to move data off of those diskettes. So this, you can see here, file and directory listings, again, for some of the Red Storm Rising scenarios. You see Sunset Research Plan. Sunset was the original title for the novel. It was the working title for Red Storm Rising. So that file is actually the, it's the storyboard for the whole book. And as somebody who read Red Storm Rising growing up in the 80s, and you know, this is something that was just to find this on a floppy disk and then to be able to pull the file off of the diskette. That was just a really fun moment. But ideally, this would be available not just to someone in Larry's basement, but it would actually be part of a library collection somewhere where other people can access it. CD-ROMs. This was actually never released. This was a prototype, spec'd artwork for a version of Harpoon that was never released from SSI, but it was cool to see. These look like interface diagrams, sort of storyboards for what the game interface would look like. You know, you could devote years and years to going through this stuff and kind of reconstructing what it all was and, you know, why anyone would care. And then there was other stuff too. So this is something that Chris Carlson actually explained to us. And I don't know that I can recapture the entirety of his explanation, but it's a little analog computer that he devised in order to be able to, it had something to do with the detection values in the game. And so Chris would spin this wheel, and he would use it as a kind of algorithm based on range to arrive at the values that were assigned to different, I believe, sensor capabilities in the game. But this was just something he kind of hacked together. It's a unique one-of-a-kind artifact. So, you know, one of the takeaways, and so that's just kind of a really quick look through some of the things in Larry's basement. I got access to all this stuff because, first of all, Larry's alive, and I don't say that glibly, but you know, there are people, particularly as the community ages, who are no longer with us. And I was fortunate that Larry was still living, that he was just around the Beltway from me, and that he's a good guy, and that he was happy to, again, literally open up his home in this way. But that's not what we call a sustainable strategy. In other words, you can't sort of pin your hopes for posterity on having the right person still be around and live close enough to you and not being a jerk and so on. That's not what curators and archivists, how they structure their profession. So some other things to think about. The importance of documenting your data. This is really the critical thing. You saw, just even flipping through those slides, how cryptic, how obscure, how arcane so much of that stuff was. If Larry hadn't been there with us as we were going through it, you know, we would have had, and you know, I have only a layperson's knowledge of naval warfare. What chance would we have had of knowing what any of that stuff was, the significance of any of that data, and so on? So the importance of documenting your data, explaining what it is, why it's important. That can mean anything from commenting your code. It could just mean attaching sticky notes to things. It could mean what archivists call metadata, which is data about other data. Second, having a migration plan. You know, if all of your data for a particular game system or what have you is, you know, if it's on some floppy disk that you do keep in a shoebox under your bed, and you keep it there because you still do have that one computer that will still run that floppy disk, again, that's not real sustainable, and there's going to come a time when that data is no longer accessible. So think actively about how to migrate the data to more contemporary formats. Having a digital will and executor. This is actually something that lots of people are sort of grasping the importance of nowadays. When folks pass, there are questions that arise about who has access to, who has responsibility for their social media, their Facebook page, who has the passwords to their computers. So as part of your estate, making a plan for any data that is important to you that you want to see passed on to others, have that built into your wishes as part of your estate. Adopt open formats and solutions. So if you use some proprietary database program that's sold commercially by a particular company, if that company goes out of business, then your data is going to go with it. Adopting open formats is by far the better way to go. If this is genuinely important to you, engage with the digital curation community. There's a lot of activity in video gaming at large around preservation. In the video game world, people love playing old computer games. So there's actually a lot of expertise in computer gaming at large around preservation, curation, and these questions of migrating and emulating data. Again, if you think you are sort of, Larry was very sort of dismissive of the idea that any kind of professional institution might be interested in his archives, but I think he was underestimating himself. And it's not out of the question to pursue a relationship with a professional institution if you think your data has any kind of broader significance to it. That's, and I think we do have some time for questions, but that's what I wanted to kind of say, and I just wanted to thank some of our funder, as well as Larry and Chris Carlson. Don Gilman and Gordon Walton were two of the developers behind Computer Harpoon. Some of the other researchers I worked with. And happy to, I think Brant is going to sort of referee the discussion and Q&A, but I'm happy to take questions or talk about whatever else people would like to hear about. So thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Matt, thank you again, for dusting this off and revisiting it. I really appreciate it. We've got a couple of things that have popped up in the Zoom chat, but I do want to ask a question before we get to them. You mentioned a few slides ago about sort of some of the people you should be getting in touch with for digital archiving or for archiving in general, but your data curation. At what stage in a project do you think designers should be thinking, oh, this is a point of curiosity, oh, here are my notes that, so I can get this game out the door, to, holy cow, I've got something that's worth preserving here. I've got something that people should be looking into. Is it the point at which a game is accepted for publication? Is it the point at which you realize you've accumulated a ton of crap and need help sorting through it? Is it the point at which you're 4 games into a series? Like, when do we call you, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. Thanks. And I don't know that you call me, but you call your friendly neighborhood digital archivist. And I don't mean to be glib about that, but particularly if you have any kind of connection to a research library of any kind, whether university-based or an independent research library like Library of Congress or New York Public Library, there will be people there with this expertise. In terms of the question of when do you start, I think that's going to vary for everybody. There's no one answer, but I think my answer to that is really, it goes back to something I said towards the beginning. Curation really begins with creation. and certain basic decisions that you make just about things like file formats and what platform you're using right from the get-go. All of that can have implications for future uses of your data. And not only if you are thinking in grandiose terms about future, I don't know, historians or libraries, but just in terms of when you begin a project like designing a game system, it's going to be presumably with you for a while. And you're going to find yourself 10, 15, 20 years later coming back to the same stuff. So you're doing yourself a favor as well.
All right, so Enrico, all the way out in Indonesia. Enrico, it's got to be past your bedtime that you're on the on the horn with us here. He wants to ask about the migration plan. It's like what you said, data curation is always active in a sense that you'd always watch the news on how data formats evolve and adjust so you can start migrating accordingly, even if it means migrating a certain data set 2 or 3 times. Is that what we're talking about, that you've got to constantly be aware of the state of the art of the data storage, not in a physical sense, but in the technical sense of how it's structured, how it's organized, and be able to migrate from the older database to the newer database to the newer spreadsheet to whatever. And I think an underlying implied question there is, what do you do about making sure you get clean migrations as a part of that?
So yeah, I think that's that's always there in the background. It's always a good thing to be looking out for. I think that in general, you're starting to see more awareness of the importance of data migration and sort of thinking long term. So Microsoft, for example, all of Microsoft's file formats are now XML based. And without getting too far into the weeds, XML is an open standard that is readable by a variety of different systems. You don't just need to have a copy of Microsoft Word to open a Microsoft Word document. There are lots of different packages that will do it now. There's a phrase that people in the digital preservation community like. It's an acronym, LOCKSS, LOCKSS, and LOCKSS stands for lots of copies keep stuff safe. And again, it's not anything we don't already know. If you've ever backed up your own work, you already know this instinctively, that lots of copies keep stuff safe. Keep copies on different platforms. If you use a cloud service nowadays, like most of us do, and you might have stuff in Dropbox, maybe you want to keep it in Google Drive too. Redundancy is your friend. And then in terms of how do you get clean migrations, I mean, that's going to always vary from system to system, but these migration paths tend to be well documented. So with a little bit of research, either from a vendor or again from somebody, say, in the library community who has done this already, you can get a feel for what the appropriate migration paths actually are.
Harold's asking, and mute myself here. Harold is asking, these companies seem to be turning over pretty quickly. It would seem we need a central repository to kind of receive this info. Things like the late Richard Berg's papers. John Hill's sister gave him some of his information from Squad Leader. What can we do to create that central space and fund that effort? And what's that research proposal going to look like when you take it to the chancellor at the University of Maryland? And there's a similar question down below also. Aaron is asking, should this be thrown at a university or a think tank like CNA? Or Patrick throws in, what about the Naval War College or USNI?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. I think it's absolutely something that the community needs to begin paying more deliberate attention to. Richard Berg is a great example from sort of the hobby side of things. Actually, when he passed, somebody on SimWorld mentioned in passing that he had a hard drive full of projects locked away on his computer, and I have I don't know who, if anybody, is responsible as his digital executor, if you will. Maybe it's somebody at GMT, I don't know. But my point is that if I could advise Richard Berg retrospectively, it would be to have appointed such a person and to have a kind of game plan ready. In terms of what institution should be tackling this, the place that has done the most work and has amassed the most in the way of collections materials is actually Stanford. Sorry. So one of my collaborators, Henry Lowood, is an archivist at Stanford University. Stanford has a little bit more money than the University of Maryland. They're also ideally situated right in Silicon Valley. They have the Apple archives there, among other things. Stanford has been very aggressively under Henry's leadership. They've been doing some collecting in the wargaming space, including tabletop war games. And if Larry were to ask me where his papers should go, that would probably be my recommendation. I do think the Naval War College is an intriguing idea. I don't know what resources, what capacities they have as part of the institution for archival curation. I think this is something that entities like CNA and RAND should be looking at. They play games with much higher stakes than we do on the hobby side, and it might matter, again, in 10 or 20 years for somebody to be able to know, to see how they arrived at their determination of what would happen if the Russians invaded the Balkans. Right? That data is coming from somewhere. Where is it coming from? How is it being maintained? Is it going to be available down the road? I would hope that there are people in those places who are thinking about such things.
I'm making sure I wasn't on mute again there. Emery brought up, as a bit of a war story, and I'm not going to read it all, but the idea of going back to your slide about plagiarizing, right? Stealing a good idea from somewhere else. The idea of copyright being a little sketchy in the game world. We actually recorded a podcast on this around the time that the Insurgent Catan was getting its patent license from the U.S. Patent Office. The idea of what are the things you can copyright or patent or protect in your intellectual property within a game. What should you be able to protect? He's got the story here of sort of how his own mini system evolved from another one, but it's gone a long way in its evolution. I think part of what you're getting at here, Emery, is the idea of some of those notes that you've done along the way may show the evolution of how you moved away from one system to a completely different one that sort of shows your originality a little bit. I think is kind of what I'm taking from some of the comments that you're throwing in here, and other people will be able to read these as they play back the YouTube video. But Matt, in terms of the evolution of the design, not just the data, talk to us a little bit about kind of archiving the design process as it moves through, not just the data underlying those designs.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. I mean, first of all, we know that people love designers' notes. In other words, we love that sense of getting a little bit of sort of insight into the creative process, not just the game itself, but why the game was made in the particular way that it was. I can't address questions of copyright specifically. That's not my expertise, but I can. I have one sort of story of my own that I can pass on via Larry Bond, that a particular concern that he had as, again, an active duty and then a reservist naval officer was the question of classification. He's publishing this commercial war game that's filled with data about sensors and weapons platforms, and he described to me some sort of fairly intense conversations that he had with superior officers about where the data was coming from, and he had to be able to keep himself out of the slammer, as I think he put it, he really needed to be able to document that everything that he was publishing in Harpoon was coming from open, non-classified, non-proprietary sources. And so having the track record, having the receipts, as it were, so that he could show, when he's quantifying some Soviet sensor capability, well, this is where the data is coming from. This is where I'm getting this stuff. He actually emphasized several times how important that was to him. Now, that's, again, not going to be the circumstance everybody finds themselves in, but certainly an issue could arise where there was a question of plagiarism or a lawsuit around intellectual property, and being able to document where you're getting your stuff from as actually, I think, a really important thing to be able to do for yourself.
The idea of classification, interesting war story there. After Persian Incursion had come out, I was coming back out of DC, and I had stopped at Quantico to meet with a friend of mine that I'd actually met at Origins, but worked at the U.S. Marine Corps G2 office at Quantico, and we were talking about Persian Incursion, and he said the day after that thing dropped, they had a mad scramble in the G2 office there, because that somebody walked in with a copy of the game and was basically berating everyone in that G2 office. How is it that a bunch of game designers with access to open source information know 5 times as much about Iranian defenses and all these sites than we know, and we're the guys that are supposed to know? So, it's amazing what you can find in the open source world. And, back to your point, it doesn't hurt to write all that stuff down, that if somebody comes knocking on your door saying, "Excuse me, where did you get this?"
Yeah, exactly.
That it doesn't hurt on that. Aaron makes a point about several third world militaries out there still using U.S. and other first world military ships and weapons from 20 to 30 years ago. Doesn't hurt to have the data on things from way back when those things are still out there. I think it's the Chileans that are still using some Israeli modified Shermans left over from World War II, where the Israelis upgunned them and gave them some new motors and suspensions. And then after the Israelis started building Merkavas, they sold them. I want to say it was the Chileans. It may have been somebody else in South America. Enrico has another question in here. This may be the last one we sneak in here. As you're looking at Larry's data, did you interview him for his framework? Sort of, how does he actually go through his process of dig up the data, document the data, store it, refine it, revisit it?
Yeah, we did, and that was actually kind of a key thing we were interested in. I really wanted to know, sort of in as much detail, like fingers on the keyboard level of detail, what programs was he using, how is he packaging and organizing all of this stuff. And the short answer is that it's evolved over the years, but there really is a kind of through line from those initial index cards to the database that he's using now. A lot of it is still the same underlying data. Larry and Chris Carlson have a very close working relationship, but Chris made a point of saying that Larry still maintains authority over the databases. Chris actually didn't want to wield such powers. So ultimately, authority and responsibility for the database is with Larry Bond, and people have also asked him over the years, would he release the database publicly? Why not put all of this in a Google spreadsheet and just let the world have at it? And when I suggested that, his face went white. So some people would be very comfortable kind of opening up the process that way. He feels completely understandably that at the end of the day, there's got to be a person, there's got to be a guy whose fingers are on the keyboard, who has responsibility, and for the foreseeable future, that's going to be him.
Yeah, I think that's true everywhere, is that somebody's got to be in charge. So, well, listen, we're at the top of the hour here. I asked you for an hour. You've graciously given us an hour of your Friday evening, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's just fun to do.
So thank you very much. Hope the audience got something out of it. Hope the audience comes back to it later and gets something out of it. Watching the stream through YouTube again. So audience, appreciate y'all being here. Thank you very much. I know a couple of y'all have already bailed out. So we're not going to bother to thank you guys since you're not here to hear it. But
you know, so let me say thank you again, Brent, to you for the invitation, and to everybody for hanging out and asking good questions. I enjoyed doing it, so thank you.
Yeah, this is great. And so, guys in the audience, if you get a chance to jump into some of the games we've got this weekend, please do. If not, at least pop in and take a look at some of the live streams. And again, quick plug for some of the seminars tomorrow. We've got Georgetown University Wargaming Society has given 2 talks. One about the actual curriculum, and another one of one of the students in the class is talking about the game design they went through as a part of that curriculum. Jim Werbineth is doing a historical talk, and I'm doing one on games and sims and training and learning. So if you get a chance, come by and join us. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it again. I'm going to kill